The mountain path became the fatal place when my own son and his wife smirked, then shoved us over the edge as if we were nothing but old baggage weighing them down. I felt the air rip past me, rocks bite at my skin, and then the crash that stole the breath from my lungs. My eyes fought to stay open, blood running warm and sticky, and in the chaos I heard my husband's faint whisper telling me not to move, not to breathe too loud, to pretend I was gone. That whisper saved me, but the truth he gave me afterward cut deeper than any rock. If you're listening, know this. It means the world when you leave a kind comment or a simple like. Your support keeps these stories alive, and it makes me feel less alone sharing pieces of my soul with you. So if this story pulls at your heart, let me know. It helps more than you think. My name is Denise. I'm 52 years old, a mother who always believed her greatest work in life was raising her son. I grew up in Georgia, the kind of place where folks knew when your porch light went out and brought you a bulb without asking. I believed in family dinners, second chances, and keeping every receipt because life has a way of checking your math. I was a bookkeeper for over 30 years, the steady hand that made sure bills got paid, even if that meant I wore the same shoes until the heels tapped like castanets. Raising Marcus wasn't easy, but I thought it was holy work. He was my only child, the boy who once held my hand so tight crossing the street I thought he'd never let go. When he was little, he dreamed of being a firefighter, the kind who saves people for free just because it's right. Somewhere along the way, the fire turned into smoke. By the time he married Tiana, I felt like I had lost him to a world that measured love in dollar signs and opportunities to climb over the very people who carried you this far. Still, I had hope. That's why I said yes to the trip. A mountain hike, Marcus had suggested, smiling too easily, as if the tension in our home could be smoothed out by fresh air and pretty views. I told myself maybe this was his way of saying sorry. Maybe he was trying to come back to me. Instead, I found myself broken on the rocks, wondering how love can turn into betrayal so sharp it slices through your faith. And yet, as I lay still, playing dead like my husband whispered, I learned something I never expected. Something that would shake me more than the fall itself. Even before that mountain trip, I knew something in my family had shifted, like a floorboard that creaks in the night, warning you it can't hold your weight much longer. I could feel it every time Marcus came around with that restless energy, the kind that made my chest tighten instead of relax. You know how a room changes when certain people walk in? The laughter drops, conversations stiffen, even the air feels heavier. That was my son now, my Marcus, my boy who used to climb into my lap with jelly-sticky hands and whisper that I was his forever favorite, now walked through my house as if he was already measuring the curtains for when it would be his. It wasn't just him, it was Tiana too. Lord knows I tried to welcome her, tried to be the kind of mother-in-law who brings sweet potato pie to Sunday dinners and compliments the outfits even when they look like they cost more than the rent. But she had a way of smiling at me that never reached her eyes, a kind of smirk that said, "You're standing in the spot I want." I could tell from the start she wasn't just after Marcus's heart. She was eyeing his inheritance like it came with a bow. It always circled back to money, doesn't it always? First, Marcus needed just a little help. Rent that came up short, a car payment that slipped through, groceries, just until next paycheck. I gave what I could, always telling myself this was temporary. But temporary turned into years, into me dipping into savings I had built for emergencies, for retirement, for peace. My boy, the one I sacrificed for, leaned harder on me with every passing month, and every time I thought I'd given enough, here came Tiana, adding her sweet and sour comments that made me feel like I owed them the world. She had a way of disguising greed as jokes. She'd laugh and say how houses should pass quicker to the younger generation, how it's unfair for folks nearing retirement age to hold on so tightly. She'd giggle like it was harmless, but her words sank into me like pins. And when I didn't respond, she'd nudge Marcus's arm and roll her eyes, as if I were the one being ridiculous. I stayed silent, but inside my chest a storm was brewing. I tried to brush it off with humor, the way older women do when life gives you more lemons than sugar. When Marcus once asked if I could co-sign for a new car, his second in 3 years, I looked him dead in the eye and said the only thing I was co-signing these days was a church potluck. I laughed at my own joke, slapped my knee for good measure. He didn't laugh, but I did, because sometimes laughter is the only armor you've got. Meanwhile, my husband Al was slipping into a silence that felt heavier than any words. He was always a man of few sentences, the type who could fix a sink without announcing it or let a whole sermon run through him without needing to discuss it afterward. But lately, his silences weren't steady. They were hiding something. I'd catch him folding papers too quickly, shoving envelopes in drawers, or sitting at the kitchen table staring at numbers he didn't want me to see. At night, he'd roll away from me, and I'd stare at the ceiling fan, feeling the space between us stretch wider than it ever had in 30 years of marriage. And still, I made excuses. Maybe he was stressed about bills. Maybe Marcus's demands weighed on him the same way they weighed on me. Maybe if I prayed harder, tried harder, cooked his favorite fried catfish more often, things would settle back into place. But that quiet voice inside me, the one mothers are born with, kept whispering that something wasn't right, that secrets were stacking up like old newspapers no one wanted to throw away. That's why, when Marcus suggested the trip, I grabbed onto the idea like it was a lifeline. A mountain hike, he said, fresh air, exercise, a chance for us all to spend time together. He smiled too wide when he said it, but I ignored that. I wanted so badly to believe he was trying to bridge the gap, to find his way back to the boy who once promised me he'd buy me a big house one day when he made it. Maybe this trip was his way of saying sorry, of rebuilding what had cracked between us. So I agreed. I told myself maybe the mountain air would clear more than our lungs. It might clear the tension, the bitterness, the feeling that I was more of a wallet than a mother to my own son. I packed sandwiches with extra mayo because Marcus liked it that way when he was little. I braided my hair back tight like I used to when I was younger, when Al and I went on church retreats and believed in fresh starts. I even put on my old sneakers, the ones with holes near the toes, telling myself it didn't matter how they looked, just that they carried me through. But deep down, beneath the hope and the prayers, I couldn't shake that tiny whisper that told me I was walking into something bigger than I could see. And if I've learned anything in 52 years of living, it's this. When a mother's spirit whispers, you better listen. Because it usually tells the truth long before the world does. The morning of the hike started too perfect. The kind of perfect that makes you suspicious when you've lived long enough to know life doesn't usually hand out days without fine print. The sun was bright, but not too hot. The air crisp enough to wake you up without biting. Birds sang like they were auditioning for a choir, and even the breeze seemed to hum. I remember standing at the trailhead with my backpack, sandwiches packed, a bottle of water clinking against my keys, and thinking, maybe this is it. Maybe today's the day things finally turn around. Marcus was unusually cheerful, almost too cheerful. He joked as if we were a normal family out for a normal day. He had that smile plastered on, the one that looked good in photos but never quite reached his eyes anymore. Tiana was dressed head to toe in brand new hiking gear, matching jacket, shiny shoes, sunglasses like she was waiting for paparazzi. I remember thinking how funny it was that she cared more about looking like she belonged on a mountain than actually walking one. She carried herself like a queen about to take her throne, not a daughter-in-law spending the day with her husband's parents. Al was quiet, more than usual, trailing behind with his hands stuffed deep in his jacket pockets. I kept glancing at him, trying to read his face, but it gave me nothing. 30 years of marriage, and I could usually tell when he was upset just by the way he stirred his coffee. But that day, he was locked away, and I didn't have the key. The trail wound upward, rocks crunching under our feet. At first, I tried to fill the silence with small talk. I pointed out the wildflowers, joked about how out of shape I felt, even teased Marcus about how he used to race ahead when he was little, daring me to keep up. He laughed politely, but it was hollow, like a recording of laughter instead of the real thing. Every step carried a strange tension, invisible, but heavy. I noticed how Marcus and Tiana walked just a little too close together, whispering things I couldn't catch, then laughing softly. Every so often, Marcus would look back at me and Al, not with affection, but with something else. Measuring, calculating. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was being paranoid. But that mother's whisper inside me, the one I'd ignored for too long, grew louder. Halfway up the trail, we stopped for water. I handed Marcus one of the sandwiches I'd packed, wrapped neatly in wax paper the way I always had. He took it, glanced at it, and set it aside like it was beneath him. Tiana wrinkled her nose, muttering something about carbs and calories, and I had to bite my tongue. I wanted to remind her that when Marcus was a boy, those sandwiches were his favorite, that there were nights I went without seconds so he could eat his fill, but I stayed quiet. Silence, after all, had become my habit. We climbed higher. The views grew wider, the path narrower, and with every step I felt like we were moving towards something I couldn't name. The birds still sang, but their music felt different now, too sharp, too loud. The trees swayed, their shadows stretching long across the ground, almost like warning fingers pointing toward danger. I tried to push the unease away, focusing on the way the mountain air filled my lungs, the way my legs remembered strength I thought I'd lost. I even made a joke about how at least the climb was burning off last Sunday's peach cobbler, and for a second, Marcus chuckled. For a second, I saw the boy he used to be. That little glimpse of him kept me moving, made me hope again that maybe I was wrong. Maybe this was just a family day with no hidden motives. But then, near the top, the trail narrowed so much we had to walk single file. I was in front, Al behind me, Marcus and Tiana at the back. I could hear them whispering, their voices low, urgent. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't like the tone. I felt a prickle run up my spine, the kind you feel when someone stares at you too long. I turned to glance back, and that's when I saw it, the look. They weren't just tired. They weren't just focused on the climb. They were watching me, watching us. Their eyes had that same shine gamblers get when they think the dice are loaded in their favor. And Tiana, with that smirk I'd seen too many times before, gripped Marcus's arm like she was bracing for something. I told myself to keep climbing. Just one more step, just one more breath. But in the pit of my stomach, I knew. This mountain wasn't just a hike. It was a stage, and the act about to play out would change everything forever. The path narrowed to almost nothing, just a thin ribbon of dirt carved into the mountain's side. On one side, solid rock rose high and unyielding. On the other, an endless drop swallowed the sky. My hands brushed the stone wall as I steadied myself, each step deliberate, my breath coming in short bursts. My sneakers scuffed against loose gravel, and I thought how foolish it was to climb so high with shoes that had already walked through more years than I cared to count. Al trailed close behind me, his silence heavy, while Marcus and Tiana lingered at the back. I could hear them whispering, words carried half by the wind, half by intent. Their tone was sharp, urgent, like plans being confirmed rather than idle chatter. My heart beat harder, each thud echoing in my ears. I wanted to turn around to ask them outright what they were plotting, but pride and fear pinned my tongue. We reached a curve where the cliff jutted out, giving us a sweeping view of the valley below. It was breathtaking. Green, rolling hills, a river cutting through like silver ribbon, sunlight bathing everything in gold. For one brief second, I let myself admire it, let myself believe this was a family outing and nothing more. And then it happened. A sudden shove against my back, hard, deliberate, undeniable. My body lurched forward, gravity snatching me before my mind caught up. The world spun, sky and rock trading places, air rushing past me so fast it screamed in my ears. My arms flailed, but there was nothing to hold on to, nothing but the terror of knowing my own child had pushed me. I crashed into the slope below, rocks cutting into my skin, my ribs slamming hard enough to steal my breath. Pain exploded across my body, sharp and hot, but worse than the pain was the sound that followed, another body thudding beside me. I turned my head, vision blurred, and saw Al lying there too, his face pale, blood trickling from his temple. Above us, shadows loomed. Marcus's figure appeared at the edge, Tiana right beside him. Their heads leaned close together, their bodies trembling not from fear, but from suppressed laughter. I saw it clear as day, the smirk spreading across Tiana's lips, the way Marcus tried to school his expression but couldn't hide the curve of satisfaction. My stomach turned colder than the mountain stone beneath me. I wanted to cry out, to scream his name, to ask why. But before I could make a sound, Al's hand gripped mine, weak but insistent. His lips barely moved, his voice so faint it was almost part of the wind. "Don't move," he whispered, his breath warm against my ear. "Pretend to be gone." Instinct told me to fight, to prove I was alive, to drag myself back up. But something in his tone froze me. This wasn't just advice, it was survival. So I stilled my body, forced my chest to rise and fall in the shallowest of breaths. I let my eyes flutter half shut, let my limbs go slack, willing myself to be nothing more than broken flesh scattered among the rocks. I heard Marcus mutter something I couldn't catch, heard Tiana's laugh, soft and cruel. Then footsteps, retreating, fading. Their silhouettes disappeared from the cliff edge, their voices swallowed by distance. I stayed frozen, my body screaming in pain until silence swallowed the mountain. And then, just as I thought I might slip into real unconsciousness, Al's hand tightened slightly around mine. His voice came again, but this time it wasn't soft or careful. It carried weight, heavy and jagged, the kind that splits your heart. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, "something you don't know. And it's worse than the fall lying there on the cold mountain ground, my body torn and bruised. I thought nothing could hurt more than the betrayal of my son." But then Al's voice shifted, heavier than the stones pressing against my back, and I realized I was wrong. The fall was brutal, yes, but the truth he carried in his chest was sharper than any cliff edge. At first, his words came slow, ragged, like each syllable cost him breath. "Denise, you need to know why this happened." His grip on my hand tightened, trembling, and even in his weakness I felt the weight of guilt rolling through his fingers. I wanted to stop him, to tell him now wasn't the time, that we needed to crawl, to run, to get as far from Marcus and Tiana as possible. But something in his eyes, tired, ashamed, yet desperate, told me he couldn't keep it buried another moment. So I listened, even as my heart begged me not to. He confessed that years ago, when Marcus's first business started falling apart, he had co-signed a loan without telling me. He thought he was helping, thought he could spare me the worry, thought maybe this was the way to finally prove himself to his son, the way a father redeems the years he worked too much and missed too many school plays. But Marcus didn't pay it back. The bank came after Al, and to cover it, he refinanced the house. Our house, the one I had scrubbed floors in until my knees cracked, the one where every birthday candle had been blown out, the one I thought was my fortress. But it didn't stop there. Al admitted he had also taken out a life insurance policy, the kind that sounded harmless at first, just in case to take care of you. Only he had made Marcus the primary beneficiary, thinking it would make our son feel secure, thinking it would stop his endless demands. He said Marcus knew about it, and worse, Tiana did too. They had asked too many questions, played too many what-if games that suddenly didn't feel like jokes. As his words sank in, my breath caught in my throat. My son hadn't just grown greedy on his own, he'd been handed the keys. Al had unlocked the door, and Marcus and Tiana had simply walked through it. What I thought was pure malice from them was rooted in decisions my husband had made in secret, decisions he thought were protecting us, but instead had planted poison in the soil of our family. I wanted to scream at him, to ask how he could make choices like that without me, how he could sign away pieces of our lives as if my voice didn't matter. But the mountain had already stolen my strength, and the betrayal sat too heavy in my chest. All I could do was let the tears slide down my cheek, mixing with dirt and blood, silent witnesses to the wreckage around me. Al kept talking, his words tumbling faster now, as though he feared he wouldn't get the chance again. He admitted he'd been scared, not of Marcus, not even of Tiana, but of me. Scared I'd leave him if I knew he'd gambled with our future. Scared I'd see him as weak, as less of a provider, less of a man. So he carried the burden alone, convincing himself he was buying time, that somehow Marcus would straighten up, pay back what he owed, and no one would ever know. But lies have a way of piling up until they topple like stones on a mountain path. And here we were, crushed under the weight of it all. The pain in my chest wasn't just physical anymore. It was the collapse of every belief I had held about my family. I had told myself for years that patience was love, that silence was strength, that giving was the same as protecting. But now, lying broken beside a husband who had hidden the truth and a son who had tried to kill me, I realized those beliefs had turned me into prey. The hardest part wasn't even Al's confession. It was the memory of Marcus as a boy, promising me he'd take care of me one day. His little hands clutching mine, his innocent eyes shining with devotion. I had believed in him with everything I had, and now that same boy had pushed me off a cliff, fueled by the very safety net his father had spun in secret. I wanted to hate Al in that moment. Part of me did, but another part, the part that still remembered the man who held my hand through childbirth, who carried me over puddles when we were young, who worked double shifts to buy Marcus his first bicycle, couldn't let go of the love even as it cracked. My anger tangled with my grief, leaving me raw, hollow, suspended between fury and despair. I lay there, eyes half shut, body pretending death, while my mind reeled with this new reality. My son wanted me gone. My husband had paved the road that led him there, and the woman I had welcomed into my family was laughing above me, believing she'd already inherited the life I built. Al's voice broke one final time. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his breath rattling. "I never thought it would come to this." And that was the moment I realized the fall was not the real betrayal. The real betrayal had been happening for years, quietly, in the shadows of our marriage and the corners of our family. The push only exposed it. The cliff didn't destroy me. It revealed the truth that had been eroding us all along. For a long time after Al's confession, I lay there broken, silent, trying to make sense of the pieces of my life that had shattered in an instant. The physical pain was bad, but it was nothing compared to the ache in my chest, the knowledge that the people I loved most had become strangers. I kept replaying Marcus's smirk, Tiana's laughter, Al's words. It all blurred together into one truth that felt like poison in my veins. I had been blind, and now I was awake in the cruelest way possible. But even in that darkness, something inside me refused to die. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the same part of me that had survived raising a boy on a shoestring budget, working double shifts while my body begged for rest. Whatever it was, it whispered louder than the pain. "You are not finished." I focused on my breath, shallow and careful, pretending to be gone. Every inhale burned, every exhale scraped, but I kept it steady. Above us, I no longer heard footsteps. Marcus and Tiana had walked away, convinced their plan had worked. That was their mistake. They thought we were weak, broken, done. But weakness has a way of hiding strength, and broken people sometimes gather sharper edges than whole ones. The spark came when I realized something simple. If they believed we were dead, then I had time. Time to think, to heal, to plan. And if there's one thing a woman like me knows how to do, it's to plan. I've planned meals from scraps, holidays with no money, ways to keep the lights on when bills were higher than paychecks. Planning was survival, and now survival was all I had. I thought about the insurance papers Al had mentioned. Policies leave trails, emails, phone calls, signatures. Banks leave trails too. Marcus and Tiana weren't as clever as they thought. Greed rarely is. They left crumbs behind, and I was determined to gather every single one. My mind raced, flipping through the things I had noticed but ignored. Tiana's watch that tracked every step, her obsession with logging workouts and showing them off. Marcus's habit of oversharing on social media, tagging locations, posting selfies even when he claimed he was too busy. Their smugness wasn't just arrogance, it was evidence waiting to be collected. But the hope wasn't only in what they left behind, it was in me, in the fact that I was still breathing when I wasn't supposed to be. That thought struck me like a blessing. What if surviving isn't just luck? What if it's purpose? Maybe I wasn't spared just to crawl away and hide. Maybe I was spared to turn their plan inside out, to use their own schemes against them. As I lay there, I imagined the looks on their faces when the truth would eventually come to light. I pictured Tiana's perfect smile cracking, Marcus's bravado collapsing, their laughter turning into stammered excuses. I could almost hear their voices stumbling over lies that wouldn't hold. That vision gave me strength, like a sip of water after days in the desert. I knew it wouldn't be easy. My body was broken, my heart was torn, my trust in Al was shattered. But I also knew something else. I had survived the impossible, and once you survive a fall like that, you realize nothing is out of reach. Al squeezed my hand again, weaker this time, but enough to remind me he was still there. Despite the anger boiling in me over what he had done, I felt a flicker of love. We were both still alive, and that meant we still had choices. Maybe not many, but enough. Enough to fight back in our own way. The mountain air felt colder now, sharper against my skin, as if it wanted to wake me up fully. I let it. I opened my mind, cataloged every detail, the angle of the sun, the direction Marcus and Tiana had gone, the sound of birds returning to their trees now that the danger had passed. Details matter. Details are what keep you alive when bigger things fall apart. And then, like a thread pulling through fabric, a single thought anchored itself in me. I am still here. They think I'm gone, but I'm still here. That means I have the power they don't even realize exists. That was the spark. It wasn't fire yet, not even close, but it was enough to keep my spirit from going cold. I had no idea how I would rise from that ground, how I would turn pain into proof, betrayal into justice. But I knew one thing for certain. This was not the end of my story. This was the beginning of theirs, the story of how their greed would become the very rope that dragged them down. And as I clung to that spark, I felt something almost like peace. Because hope, even the smallest flicker, is louder than despair when you decide to feed it. The hours after the fall blurred together, but one thing stayed sharp in my mind. I had to be smart. Anger screamed at me to get up, to storm back down the trail, to confront Marcus and Tiana in front of the world. But anger burns too fast, and I had already seen what rushing into danger cost me. This wasn't about rage anymore. It was about survival, and survival required patience. Al and I dragged ourselves down the slope slowly, our bodies aching with every move. He leaned heavier on me than I expected, but I let him, even though my ribs screamed and my arms trembled. My mind never stopped working. Each step, each painful breath, I repeated the same thought like a prayer. Don't let them win. don't let this be the end. When we finally reached the bottom, battered and bloodied, we didn't call anyone right away. That might sound strange, but I knew instinctively we couldn't just walk into the police station and say, "Our son pushed us off a cliff." Without proof, it would sound like the rantings of two desperate old fools. Marcus was too charming when he wanted to be, Tiana too polished. People would see them as the young couple with ambition, and us as bitter parents inventing stories. No, I needed more than words. I needed evidence, a story the world couldn't ignore, a case so solid even Marcus couldn't talk his way out. So I began quietly preparing, the way I'd always prepared when life tried to push me down. My whole life had trained me for this. I was a bookkeeper after all. I lived in details, in receipts, in numbers that never lied. If Marcus and Tiana thought they could erase us like ink on paper, they forgot that paper always leaves an imprint. The first thing I did was document. I took photos of my bruises, of Al's cuts, of the torn clothes we wore. I saved them on a hidden drive, labeling them in a way only I would understand. I wrote down everything I remembered, the whispers on the trail, the smirks, the shove, even the exact angle of the sun when it happened. Memory fades, but ink keeps things alive. Next, I turned to Al's confession. As much as it hurt, I knew it was crucial. Late one night, while he slept fitfully, I whispered into my old recorder, recounting every word he had told me about the loans, the insurance, the mortgage. My voice cracked as I said it out loud, but I pushed through, because truth has to be captured before it slips away. I also made him repeat parts of it to me when he was awake, nudging him to explain details until I had enough to piece together the puzzle. Then came the part I almost enjoyed, digging into Marcus and Tiana's world. You see, greedy people love to brag without realizing they're leaving footprints. Tiana couldn't take a step without posting about it, her smartwatch syncing every hike, every calorie burned, every location tagged. Marcus had a habit of oversharing on social media, flashing smiles in restaurants, tagging geotags, boasting about family adventures. I scrolled back through his pages, through photos where my face was cropped out, through captions that dripped with fake affection, and then I found it. A picture he had posted right before the hike, bragging about fresh starts and the letting go of old baggage. My heart clenched, but my mind sharpened. That was evidence, if only I could tie it to what came next. I also started reaching out quietly. I contacted a victim's advocate I knew from church, someone who had once spoken about protecting women in dangerous situations. I didn't tell her everything, just enough to plant the seed. She gave me the name of a detective, someone she trusted, someone who listened more than he talked. That was enough for now. Even as I gathered, I kept my demeanor calm around Marcus and Tiana. They came by to check on us, pretending concern, their voices honeyed, their eyes cold. Tiana brought soup once, setting it on the table like she was serving charity to the needy. Marcus asked too many questions about our wills, about the house, about whether we had thought about end-of-life planning. I nodded, smiled, played the part of the tired, gullible mother. But inside, I was memorizing every word, every glance, every slip of their tongues. Planning became my armor. While my body healed, my mind built a case. Every bruise was a receipt. Every lie they told was a ledger entry. Every fake smile was a deposit in the account I was building for their downfall. I knew it wouldn't be quick. Justice never is, but it would come. And when it did, it would come with interest. Sometimes, late at night, when pain kept me awake, I would imagine the moment it all came crashing down on them. I pictured the shock on Tiana's perfect face, the way Marcus's charm would crumble when the truth cornered him. That image kept me going, gave me strength to keep adding one more detail, one more piece of evidence, one more step closer to the day they'd realize the parents they tried to bury had risen stronger than ever. And so, quietly, carefully, I prepared. Because survival was only the beginning. Revenge I decided, would be the rest of the story. There's a moment in every hard story where you decide whether to hold your breath or let the world hear you breathe again. For me, that moment came when the pain had dulled enough for my hands to stop trembling and my mind to stop replaying the push. I was still wrapped in bandages and thick with the smell of antiseptic, but a new sort of courage had started to rise inside me, stubborn as morning sun pushing through curtains. I realized then that I could do this alone, or I could let other kind souls stand with me. Pride is a heavy coat to wear when you're hurt. Sometimes you need people to help take it off. I reached out to a friend from church who made pies that could fix any mood, and she brought not only a pie but also contact details for a victims support group. I called because I needed more than paperwork and detective names. I needed people who understood how fear and betrayal felt in your bones. They listened without judgment, and they folded me into a circle that felt like warm sweaters on a cold day. Those women told me how to talk to lawyers, how to preserve evidence, how to keep my heart from cracking while I rebuilt a life that felt safe again. I started going to appointments, doctor visits, therapist sessions, meetings with a counselor who taught me that grief and anger sometimes sit at the same table, and you don't have to kick one out to feed the other. I learned to move slowly and deliberately, to treat my body like the fragile treasure it was, and to let trusted people carry the heavier pieces for a while. There were practical things, too. A friend helped me lock down online accounts. Another showed me how to export social media posts without tipping anyone off. And my cousin, bless her soul, set up a private email so I could collect documents quietly. I also learned to laugh again, in small, dangerous ways. There's a joke older women love. If you want to scare a young person, tell them your joints ache in the morning and watch their faces. I use that kind of humor to keep myself from falling into bitterness. I'd joke about investing in orthopedic shoes and a loud walking stick that doubled as a microphone for when I needed to announce my comeback. Those little laughs felt like stitches, tiny and necessary. And here's something I want to say to you from one heart to another. If this story moves you, if it wakes something inside your chest or reminds you of someone you love, please consider helping. Hitting like, leaving a comment, or subscribing does more than fill a number. It tells me my words reached you, and it puts more light on stories that need to be heard. When you press subscribe, you're not just following a channel. You're standing with a woman who chose to turn pain into purpose. Your small click helps me keep telling the truth, keeps these voices alive, and helps me afford the little things that make this work possible. So if you feel it, if your heart is moved, please like and subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. It matters more than you know. Back on the practical front, I began coordinating with the detective the advocate had recommended. He was quiet, the kind of man who carries knowledge like a pocket knife, useful and always at the ready. He advised patience and precision. He showed me how to preserve evidence properly and recommended a park ranger he trusted to look at trail cameras. At first, I felt silly. Trail cameras, social posts. But the detective's steady eyes told me to trust the little things. He said, "Small proof is proof." And in a world where smiles can be weaponized, proof becomes armor. Every phone call, every file I saved, felt like I was building a ladder out of the hole they'd hoped to bury me in. There were moments of doubt when my chest tightened and I'd think, maybe I'm too old for this kind of fight. Then I'd remember raising Marcus by myself some nights, balancing bills and bedtime stories, and I'd feel ridiculous for doubting my own stubbornness. Age had given me patience and a stubborn will, not a resignation. I also kept watching Marcus from a distance in the way you watch the weather. You don't stare, but you notice patterns. His posts were more frequent now, as if the world was his stage and he needed applause. Tiana's photos showed carefully staged smiles, mountains posed like they belonged in magazine spreads. Greed makes people theatrical. They forget they leave tracks when they perform. That forgetfulness is what I relied on. So I worked quietly, building a net with care and letting the community hold me up when the nights felt too long. I kept a journal, pages of anger, pages of dark humor, and pages where I wrote down small joys so my heart wouldn't forget how to live. I wrote the things I wanted to say, not for anyone else, but so my own voice could find its strength again. This part of the journey was not glamorous. It involved waiting rooms, phone calls that went nowhere before they led somewhere, and the slow, steady mending of a body and a trust that had been torn. But it taught me something vital. Asking for help doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. And every human deserves someone to stand with them when the world tries to pull them under. If you're still here, thank you. If you choose to press that like button or leave a word below, know I read everyone, and they lift me higher than you might imagine. Your support is the soft work behind the hard work, and together we keep these stories breathing. By the time a few months passed, my bruises had faded to yellow and green, but the fire in my chest hadn't dimmed. If anything, it had only grown hotter. Healing gave me strength, and with strength came clarity. I knew I couldn't just wait for justice to stroll up to my door. I had to tighten the net myself, stitch it strong enough that Marcus and Tiana couldn't wriggle free no matter how smooth they tried to talk. I began with the trail ranger the detective had mentioned. He was a quiet man, sunburnt face, and eyes that had seen more than he said. He didn't blink when I asked about cameras near the cliff. Instead, he showed me stills, images caught from motion detectors hidden in the trees. There it was, Marcus and Tiana walking close behind us, their bodies leaning forward, their faces full of intent. One frame showed the smirk I'd memorized, Tiana's lips curved like she had just tasted victory. Another frame, seconds later, showed nothing but empty trail. It wasn't proof of the push, but it was enough to raise questions. Questions are seeds, and seeds grow when planted in the right soil. Then came the digital breadcrumbs. My cousin, the tech-savvy one, pulled Marcus's posts from that day and preserved them with timestamps. Fresh starts, he had written, a picture of the mountain behind him, the same mountain he pushed us down minutes later. Tiana had bragged about hitting her step goal early, data that lined up perfectly with the time of the fall. Arrogance makes people sloppy, and they had been sloppy enough to leave a trail even I could follow. The detective advised patience. "Build the pile until it's too high to ignore," he told me, his pen tapping slowly against his notebook. So I kept building. I gathered Al's financial papers, the insurance policy with Marcus's name stamped on it, the mortgage documents signed in secret. I made copies, stored them in 3 different places, one with the detective, one with my church friend, and one hidden in my old recipe box beneath the card for banana pudding. You don't get to 52 without learning how to hide treasures in plain sight. Meanwhile, I played the role Marcus and Tiana expected. When they visited, I smiled through gritted teeth, let them believe I was still the same weary mother, too tired to question, too loyal to suspect. I listened when Tiana bragged about a new purse, when Marcus hinted about one day owning the house, when they whispered to each other thinking I wasn't paying attention. I let them talk because talking people reveal themselves sooner or later. And here's the funny thing about playing dumb. It makes liars overconfident. They think you're blind, so they stop hiding their footprints. They think you're deaf, so they stop whispering carefully. And when they stop hiding, you see everything. I also leaned on my community. The women from the support circle kept me steady, reminding me not to rush. My church friends prayed with me, yes, but they also kept ears open, catching gossip about Marcus and Tiana, showing off money they didn't have before. Even the detective smiled one day when he said, "They're digging their own hole. You just need to hold the shovel when the time comes." The real test came when I decided to set a trap of my own. I invited Marcus and Tiana to what I called a healing dinner. I told them I wanted to move past the pain, to build bridges, to forgive. I made mac and cheese, fried chicken, collard greens, the kind of meal that makes people loosen their tongues. I also invited a therapist friend, someone trained to ask the sort of questions that sound harmless but dig deep. Marcus came dressed sharp, Tiana in heels too high for a dinner table. They smiled wide, performed kindness, but their eyes gave them away. Over sweet tea and cornbread, the therapist asked simple things. How do you see family responsibility? What kind of legacy do you hope to build? Marcus answered too quickly, Tiana too vaguely. And when she gently pressed about financial planning, their hands fidgeted, their voices cracked just slightly. I sat quiet, sipping tea, letting their own discomfort betray them. By the end of the evening, I had more than food in my belly. I had fresh cracks in their story, contradictions that would matter later. They left smiling, believing they had convinced me of their goodness. But I knew better. The net was tightening, strand by careful strand, and soon it would close around them completely. Sometimes I laughed to myself about it. They thought I was the old hen they could pluck feathers from at will. But hens peck back when cornered, and I was pecking with every detail, every file, every question asked at just the right time. Their downfall wasn't coming like a storm. It was coming like a slow leak in a roof, dripping until the whole ceiling caves in. And with every drip, I felt stronger. The day it all came crashing down didn't feel dramatic at first. That's the way life works sometimes. Earthquakes start with a tremor you barely notice. I woke up early, brewed coffee strong enough to stand a spoon upright in, and pulled on my Sunday best dress, the navy one with tiny white dots. I wanted to look composed, steady, like a woman ready to stand in her own truth, not broken, not bitter, just prepared. I had arranged it carefully, every detail thought out like a recipe you've made so many times you could stir it blindfolded. The occasion was a church cookout, open to everyone, the kind of event where gossip and fried chicken flow in equal measure. Marcus and Tiana loved to show off at gatherings, arriving late with wide smiles and clothes too expensive for their means. They thought crowds adored them. That arrogance was exactly why I chose the setting. If justice was going to arrive, it was going to arrive with witnesses. The food was already spread out when they walked in. Foil pans of mac and cheese steaming, potato salad sweating under the sun, sweet tea poured into plastic cups. Laughter bubbled through the lot, kids ran with balloons, and a choir playlist played faintly from someone's old speaker. Normal, ordinary. But my heart beat faster than the tambourine in a gospel song. Marcus strutted across the grass like a man owning land he didn't buy. Tiana's heels sank slightly into the dirt, but she held her head high as if the earth itself was beneath her. They kissed cheeks, hugged cousins, and paraded their charm. They had no idea what was waiting for them. I had arranged for my therapist friend to be there, the same one from the healing dinner. She was clever with her phone and had already set up a live stream, framed as a talk about forgiveness and family. Folks thought they were tuning in to hear something soft and spiritual. In reality, they were about to watch a family unravel in real time. The detective arrived too, quiet as always, blending into the crowd in plain clothes. With him came the ranger holding a folder thick with photographs and timestamps. 2 uniformed officers stayed in the background sipping sodas, looking casual. But their eyes never left Marcus and Tiana. I let the food settle first. People ate, talked, laughed. Marcus even bragged about a new investment, his words slick with rehearsed confidence. Tiana giggled too loud, touching her necklace like she wanted everyone to notice. I waited, sipping lemonade, my hands steady even though my heart thudded like a drumline. Then the ranger stepped forward, clearing his throat. He laid photos on the table, one by one. Grainy trail camera stills, Marcus and Tiana behind us on the mountain, their faces sharp, their bodies angled too close. A timestamp lining up with Tiana's smartwatch record. Another photo, Marcus's social post from the same hour boasting about fresh starts. The crowd hushed. Plastic forks paused in midair. Someone muttered, "Lord have mercy." The detective added his voice, calm but cutting. He spoke of financial records, insurance policies naming Marcus as beneficiary, the refinanced house papers Al had signed in secret. He explained how greed leaves trails, how those trails pointed in one direction, toward the smiling couple standing in front of us, their faces suddenly pale under the church lot sun. Marcus tried to laugh it off, that fake laugh he'd used to charm teachers out of homework and bosses out of deadlines. "This is ridiculous," he said, waving his hands. But the crowd wasn't buying it. Too many eyes had seen the photos. Too many ears had heard the details. Tiana snapped back that it was all coincidence. But her voice cracked, her hands shook, and the live stream caught every tremor. And then came the moment I'd been waiting for. The officers stepped forward, reading rights aloud. The words cut through the summer air sharper than any knife. Gasps rippled across the lot. An auntie dropped her spoon straight into the potato salad, staring wide-eyed. Children stopped mid-run, frozen by the sight of police escorting away the people who had once smiled like royalty. I didn't cheer, I didn't gloat, I just sat there, hands folded in my lap, letting the weight lift off me like a coat I had worn too long. Around me, whispers rose. People putting pieces together, people realizing what had been happening behind closed doors. Public shame is heavier than prison sometimes, and Marcus and Tiana had just been stripped bare in front of the very community they wanted to impress. That was the snap, the moment when lies shattered under the weight of truth. Not with a bang, but with a silence so deep you could hear the judgment in every heartbeat around us. And as the officers led them away, I thought of that mountain path, the shove, the laughter. They had tried to bury me with gravity and greed. Instead, gravity and greed had buried them in proof. The days after the cookout felt like waking from a long fever dream. For so long I had lived under the weight of lies, betrayal, and fear that my bones had forgotten what it felt like to stand without shaking. But once Marcus and Tiana were taken away in handcuffs, the air around me shifted. The silence in my home no longer pressed on my chest. It felt open, like a window cracked after a storm. News spread quickly. Word of mouth in our community moves faster than any headline, and before I could even fold away the leftover foil pans from the cookout, phones were buzzing with the story. People whispered in grocery aisles, murmured at the barber shop, and raised eyebrows at Sunday service. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others said they'd seen it coming all along. But the one thing they all agreed on was this: Marcus and Tiana had fallen from grace in the most public, irreversible way. The financial world responded too. The bank froze every questionable account. The insurance company halted the policy payout, demanding full investigations into Marcus's conduct. Lawyers circled, not for me, but for them, asking hard questions they couldn't answer. For once, the pressure wasn't on my shoulders, it was on theirs. And I have to tell you, seeing them squirm under the same weight they once tried to crush me with, that was justice sweeter than peach cobbler. As for Al, my husband, he finally laid his truth bare. After the cookout, he sat across from me at our kitchen table, his hands folded like a schoolboy waiting for discipline. His eyes were heavy with shame, but this time he didn't hide behind silence. He admitted every misstep, signing papers without me, trying to shield me with lies, letting pride guide him instead of honesty. He didn't defend himself, didn't try to soften it. He just said he was sorry, not with excuses, but with tears that fell onto the wood between us. And though anger still lingered, though I couldn't pretend the hurt was gone, I saw the man I had married in those tears. The one who had built a life with me from nothing, who had worked himself ragged to give Marcus chances. Weakness had led him astray, yes, but love was still in his bones. And maybe forgiveness wasn't immediate, but it began that day, not for his sake, but for mine. Forgiveness is less about freeing the other person and more about setting yourself free from bitterness. Marcus, on the other hand, was a shadow of the man who had once strutted across the church lot. In jailhouse hearings, his arrogance melted. The charm he had polished for years dulled into stammers and excuses. Without Tiana's arm linked in his, he looked smaller, almost boyish again, but not in a way that softened me. No, he looked like a boy who had burned every bridge behind him and was now staring at the ashes, wondering why he was alone. Tiana, stripped of her polished veneer, didn't fare much better. Courtrooms don't care about designer heels or staged smiles. She sat stiffly in hearings, her voice shaking when confronted with evidence. The live stream clip of her smirking at the cliffside had spread beyond our community, replayed and replayed until no one could deny what they had seen. The court of public opinion had already tried her, and the official court was catching up. For me, the power shift wasn't about revenge alone. It was about reclaiming my own place in life. For too long, I had lived small to keep the peace, quieting my instincts, swallowing my words, letting others dictate the pace of my story. But now I walked into rooms with my head higher because I had faced the ugliest kind of betrayal and survived. People looked at me differently, not as a victim, but as a woman who had taken her pain and turned it into proof, her silence into strength. I even found humor in it, the kind that comes when the worst is finally behind you. I'd joke with the women at church that if anyone invited me on a hike now, I'd show up in steel-toed boots, with pepper spray in one pocket and a witness in the other. They laughed, fanning themselves, telling me I was better than Netflix. And I laughed too, because sometimes laughter is the final word against those who tried to break you. The power balance had flipped completely. Marcus and Tiana, once smug and untouchable in their own eyes, were now small, desperate, and pitiful. Al and I, once broken on the rocks, stood upright again, not perfect, not unscarred, but stronger than before. And as I sipped sweet tea on my porch, watching the world spin on, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. When all the hearings were done and the last signatures had been inked on court papers, I sat on my porch one evening with the cicadas humming like an old hymn in the background and finally let myself breathe fully again. The house, my house, stood steady behind me. The very walls that Marcus and Tiana once thought would belong to them. It was still mine, scarred maybe with memories too heavy to ignore, but still standing tall. Just like me. Life didn't go back to what it had been before. You don't come back from betrayal the same way you don't mend broken glass without a scar showing through. But life did go forward. I still cooked dinner, still swept floors, still clipped coupons out of habit. And yet, every ordinary act carried a different weight now, one that whispered, you survived, and you reclaimed what was yours. Al and I rebuilt slowly. Trust doesn't grow back overnight, but it does grow if you water it with honesty. He started talking more, little by little, about bills, about fears, about the regrets that had weighed on him like cinder blocks. And I started listening, not with blind trust this time, but with clear eyes and boundaries. Love doesn't erase mistakes, but sometimes it chooses to walk beside them anyway, if only because walking alone feels colder. As for Marcus and Tiana, their story unraveled like cheap fabric. The world that once admired their charm now turned its back. Friends disappeared, neighbors avoided them, and the same community they had tried to impress with their ambition now spoke their names only with pity or disgust. Whatever future they had imagined collapsed under the weight of their own choices. Greed had been their compass, and it had led them straight off a cliff of their own making. I never celebrated their downfall with fireworks or parties. Revenge, I learned, isn't about dancing on someone else's grave. It's about restoring the balance that was tipped unfairly against you. It's about looking at yourself in the mirror and finally seeing dignity staring back. My satisfaction came quietly, in the knowledge that truth had stood taller than lies, that justice had spoken louder than betrayal. I found myself laughing more again in small ways, laughing at reruns on TV, at my girlfriend's stories during Bible study, even at myself when my knees popped like popcorn while I climbed the church steps. Humor felt sweeter now, lighter, like a gift I thought had been stolen but was only tucked away waiting for me to claim it. One afternoon, as I watered the flowers by the porch, a neighbor asked me what I had learned through it all. I thought about it for a moment. The hose heavy in my hands, the water sprinkling across petunias that leaned toward the light. And I said, don't hand greedy people a map to your blessings and act surprised when they show up early. Protect what's yours, love who's worth loving, and never let silence take the place of truth. That was my moral, plain and simple. Life gives back what you allow it to take. Boundaries aren't walls. They're doors with locks, and it's up to us to decide who deserves a key. So I sit here now, older, wiser, scarred, but unbroken. My son made choices that tore at the very fabric of who I thought we were, but in the end, his betrayal didn't define me. It revealed me, and what it revealed was strength, resilience, and a refusal to stay down when life tried to push me off the edge. If you've listened this far, thank you, truly. Your presence, your likes, your comments, your willingness to walk this story with me. It matters more than I can say. And while this chapter of my life is one I never wanted to write, it's also one I'll never regret sharing. Because maybe, just maybe, it reminds someone out there that no matter how far you fall, you can still rise again. And so I leave you with this truth. Betrayal may cut deep, but justice cuts deeper. And peace, the kind that comes after the storm, heals deeper still.